Okay, so we're illustrating a car. We traced the main parts of the car from the photograph, which gave me this pen-like ink drawing here. Then we've used the eyedrop tool, the V selection tool to select shapes, then the eyedrop tool to take colors directly from the photograph to get this basic blocked-in color here. This car here with the basic blocked-in colors, and I duplicated that. I sort of like that effect. I might use it for something else in the future, so I duplicated that and saved that. And then I did a lot more detail work to get this car that's pretty close to finish here. I'm just going to show you how I did some of this work. We went from this solid blocky color car to this more complete car. And I started off by drawing some more detailed shapes over areas of this car that I didn't in my large blocky car, so I could come back in and draw some detailed shapes. I can do that with a pen tool, P, and I can draw little shapes. Even some of these little lines are easier to create using the pen tool. So I can draw a little pen tool shape here. Go to my eyedrop tool I, grab a dark color, go back to the V, which is the move tool or selection tool, and then I can move that shape into place here. Gives me that opening for my, or that little crack by the door. Now it's a little too dark, so I can always go to my appearance window. Remember, the appearance window or appearance panel is a very useful panel to have open. I can adjust the opacity on that. I can lower the opacity until it's like a dark gray. If it's, then I can resize it. Maybe it's too big or too thick. I can thin it down a little bit there. All right. So that's how I did a lot of these lines. Just drawing shapes instead of using the pencil tool or the pen tool. You can use the pen tool. I'm sorry, you can also draw strokes if you'd rather do that using the brush tool, but I like to draw little shapes there that I can adjust later. Okay, so that's some of that. I got a lot of the details, everything from these different shadows. Some of these highlight shapes I drew using the pen tool. Okay, and I can always trace them over here, then bring them over here. Let me do one more. Now this one, instead of the pen tool, I can use the pencil tool. Here's the pencil tool. The hotkey for that is N. So I hit N on my keyboard, and I can come over here and draw certain shadows and highlights. I haven't really done too much work on this fender here, so I can do some of that now. So what I'm going to do is click and drag and draw out this darker tone here. And I'm going to select I for eyedropper, click and grab that color, V for selection tool, click and move that into place. Okay, you know, it's not too bad, but it's a little too stark of a difference, a little too much of a jump there. So I'm going to grab the different, slightly lighter color. There we go. And V for my move tool. I sort of like it, but feels like it's a little too solid on the edges, so I can soften the edges through my appearance panel. I select that shape, go to my appearance panel, effect, blur, Gaussian blur. These are sort of Photoshop effects. Gaussian blur is a good one. Preview, and I can raise it up to however blurry I want it. Maybe 11.5, maybe 27, 25. I think I can go around somewhere closer to 20. And okay. Now it looks like a pretty realistic shadow there. That's how I did a lot of these other shadows. Can also lower the opacity if I need to make it more see-through. Or do one of these blending modes here, like darken, which will let it be sort of transparent also. There we go. Do this again. I can either do the pen tool P or N for the pencil tool. The pencil, click and drag that pencil around until I have the shape I want. It's a little harder to get used to. Got a little out of control there, but I think we'll be okay. I grab that color, V, remove that in place. I can blur out the edges using Gaussian blur. I can also use stylized feather. Stylized feather has sort of the same effect, but I like the blur Gaussian blur. Preview, lower that a little bit. Okay, I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit so it's somewhat see-through. Maybe I'll just do a darken. Lower the opacity. It's a little too big, so I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so it fits within that fender. There we go. And I'm going to get a darker tone here too. So let me do another one. And for the pencil, I'm going to get some of this darker area here. I, V, move tool, move it into place. And do the same type of thing. Go ahead. Blur, Gaussian blur, preview. A little more. Not too bad. And I'll do one more over here. Let me do a pen tool for this one. P, and I can draw a clearer one here. I grab some darker tone. V, move that guy over here. Under my appearance window, effects, blur, Gaussian blur, preview, more or less, it's up to you. There we go. And not too bad, looks pretty good. So that's how I did a lot of these other effects here, these other shapes. I selected them, blurred them out a little bit, lowered the opacity, built up these different shapes. There's 4 or 5 different shapes over here to give me all these shadows. I can also use this for the highlight areas. Okay. Another thing I can do is use a gradient tool, or use a gradient. I use a gradient on a lot of these base shapes. Okay, I created some swatches. Here's how I create a swatch. And go to eyedrop tool. I can grab, say, a highlight color on this fender. And if I look right here in my color window, after I use my eyedrop tool to grab a color, it puts it right here in the swatch area here. I can click this little triangle and say create new swatch. I can give it a name, make the name number 3. There's my new color. I'm going to add a little more orange to it. Okay. That's saved up here in my swatches panel. Swatch 3. I'm going to click on a darker tone or mid-tone. There it is. Looks pretty nice. I'm going to save that one. Create a new swatch. I'm going to call that one 4. And then I'm going to click on the darker one. New swatch. Call that number 5. And they're all up here. 3, 4, 5. Why am I doing this? Here's why. Now, if I select this shape and get my gradient window out here, and I add that basic gradient there, it goes from dark to light. Oh, I can change these colors. I can click on this gradient slider, double click, click on my swatches, and there's 3. I'll click this medium one, double click, gradient 4, and number 5. Okay, so now I have that gradient there. I can save that gradient. And I can, once I have a gradient on the shape here, I can come over here to my gradient tool and rearrange the direction of that. Change the direction of that gradient around. Alright, so you can see the light, medium, and dark. Make that smaller so I can really see the change there and get it pretty close to what it looks like over here. A little bit more. There we go, not too bad. So it's starting to look pretty good. I'm just going to do a few more highlights. I can do that with the N tool, pencil tool. I'm just going to draw out some highlights here. I can get a light color, even a white. V, move that guy in place, and then adjust it. Opacity, lower the opacity. A very subtle highlight, and then blur the edges. Effects, blur. Once again, Gaussian blur. So very subtle highlight there. There we go. So it's looking pretty good. So use a combination of a gradient, using the pen or pencil tool to draw shadows and highlights, and then through my appearance window using blurs. Now if I have some of these shapes made, I can duplicate these. Option, click, drag, then maybe use it somewhere else. I duplicate that shape. Well, that might fit pretty good over there. It gives me another level of change there. There it is. I can move it around until it feels right. So I can duplicate any of these highlights and shadows I use and use them over and over. There's a dark one. I hit Option. Well, I could use that over here somewhere. Duplicate that and bring that over there. So there you go. Another thing is the window. I drew that window shape, filled it with like a blue-gray, and lower the opacity so it makes it see-through. I can also do that with a pencil, get a highlight with the pencil tool, N for pencil tool. I can just draw a little subtle highlight shape in there, some reflections or something. I'm going to fill it with white. Then I'm going to go lower the opacity and blur the edges. Once again, I can use stylized feather. I like to use Gaussian blur. Okay, so that gives me a nice highlight on the glass to make it feel pretty real. Could also make another one and just make a little highlight there, one step brighter. Blur that guy out. Let's give it one more step. Well, I like that. I might use it on these windows. I'm on the Move tool, V, Option, click, drag that guy over here, Option, click, drag. So I can get some highlight effects all across. Some of that window looks really transparent, translucent. Did the same thing to draw the shadow. I use the pencil tool, traced out the shadow here, put it to the back of my layers, all my layers, lowered the opacity, and blurred out the edges with the Gaussian blur. Okay, just gotta be careful of the placement so it doesn't feel like your car is hovering. And there you go. Let me do one more level of highlights here. Just one more level. I already have one here in the window. I can duplicate that one. Option, click, drag. Put that right there. So I'm gonna get that one more level of shine to push that forward. I think that looks pretty good. I did the same type of thing. I used a metallic gradient. Made a gradient with grays, blacks, and whites for a lot of my metal pieces here. And each little part there, I did some more shadows and highlight shapes there using the same method. Also, that's how I did this highlight here. Drew it out with a pencil, made it white, lowered the opacity, blurred out the edges. I also did a darker shadow here. So the combination of gradients, highlights, and shadows are really building up those different color changes and shapes. You can get a pretty realistic looking car. Then our next step will be to create a background and place this car in that illustrated background.